Power couldn't save him. Privilege meant nothing. When Joseph Stalin's eldest son faced the ultimate test, his own father looked away. What happened behind the barbed wire of a Nazi death camp remains one of history's most chilling betrayals. A son abandoned, a father unmoved, and a death shrouded in secrets that still haunt us today. Before we dive into this devastating story, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell. You're watching Timeless Words, where we uncover the truth behind history's darkest moments. Drop a comment below telling us what historical figure we should cover next. Now let's get into it. The Unwanted Child. March 18, 1907. A baby's cry echoed through a modest home in Barbed, Georgia, but the man who should have cared most was already gone. Yakov Dzhugashvili entered a world that had no place for him. His father, the revolutionary known as Yakov Dzhugashvili, soon to become Joseph Stalin, was too busy plotting the overthrow of an empire to notice his newborn son. 9 months later, tragedy struck. Kato Svanidze, Yakov's mother, collapsed from typhus. She was just 22 years old. At her funeral, witnesses saw something disturbing in Stalin's face. Nothing. No tears. No grief. Just cold detachment. After that day, he walked away from his infant son and never looked back. Yakov grew up shuffled between relatives' homes in Tbilisi, never knowing stability, never understanding why his father vanished. While other children had parents, Yakov had questions. While Stalin built bombs and organized strikes against the Tsar, his son wore hand-me-down clothes and wondered if he mattered to anyone. The years crawled by. Stalin got arrested. Stalin escaped from Siberian exile. Stalin rose through the Bolshevik ranks. Through all of it, he never sent a letter, never asked about his son, never acknowledged that somewhere in Georgia, a boy was growing up carrying his name. By 1917, when the revolution exploded and Lenin's Bolsheviks seized control of Russia, Stalin stood at the center of power. He helped reshape an entire nation. But Yakov, still in Georgia, still forgotten, still invisible to the man whose blood ran through his veins. Welcome to hell. The early 1920s brought a reckoning. At 14, Yakov finally traveled to Moscow and stepped into the Kremlin. Imagine that moment. A teenager who'd grown up in poverty suddenly thrust into the nerve center of Soviet power. He must have hoped for reconciliation, maybe even love. Instead, he found rejection wrapped in luxury. Stalin's new wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, tried to create warmth in a household built on fear, but her efforts crumbled against Stalin's contempt. Stalin looked at his son and saw weakness. He saw a quiet, bookish teenager who preferred literature to politics, sensitivity to strength. The insults started immediately. Useless, pathetic, weak. Stalin didn't just ignore Yakov. He actively humiliated him, often in front of others. Every dinner became an interrogation. Every interaction reinforced the same message. You're not good enough, you never will be, and you don't belong here. Yakov's half-siblings, Vasily and Svetlana, watched from the sidelines as their father systematically destroyed their older brother's spirit. The Kremlin walls witnessed a slow-motion emotional execution that would set the stage for actual death years later. The shot that missed. By 1928, Yakov was 21 and drowning. He'd found one lifeline. Zoya Gunina, a Jewish woman who actually saw him as a person, not as Stalin's disappointing experiment. For the first time in his life, Yakov experienced something resembling happiness. He wanted to marry her. He wanted escape. Stalin crushed that dream without hesitation. Despite the Soviet Union's public stance against anti-Semitism, Stalin privately viewed Zoya's Jewish background as a problem. He didn't discuss it. He didn't negotiate. He simply forbade the marriage and mocked the relationship. What happened next shocked even Stalin's inner circle. Yakov locked himself in a room, pressed a pistol against his chest, and pulled the trigger. The bullet missed his heart, but tore through tissue and muscle. He collapsed, bleeding out, certain he would die. He survived. And when Stalin heard about the suicide attempt, he laughed. The man who would later send millions to their deaths in gulags made jokes about his own son's anguish. He couldn't even shoot straight, Stalin reportedly sneered. That moment severed whatever thin thread still connected father and son. Into the fire. Despite everything, Yakov still believed in the Soviet cause. He joined the Red Army, enrolled in artillery school, and earned his commission as a lieutenant. He didn't use his father's name to advance. He followed orders, studied tactics, and tried to prove himself through service rather than connection. June 22, 1941, shattered whatever fragile stability Yakov had built. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's massive invasion of the Soviet Union, crashed across the border with over 3 million German troops. The Wehrmacht moved like a steel tsunami, destroying Soviet divisions, bombing airfields, and cutting supply lines with ruthless efficiency. Yakov's artillery battery was positioned near Vitebsk in Belarus, directly in the path of the German advance. Within days, Luftwaffe bombers pounded Soviet positions. German tanks broke through defensive lines. Communications collapsed. Chaos consumed the Western Front. Some accounts suggest Yakov's unit ran out of ammunition and had nowhere to retreat. Others hint he may have been wounded during the bombardments. What we know for certain is this. On July 16, 1941, near Smolensk, Yakov Dzhugashvili became a prisoner of war. The Germans couldn't believe their luck. They'd captured Stalin's son, a propaganda goldmine. They photographed him in his uniform, looking defeated. They printed leaflets showing his capture and dropped them over Soviet lines, hoping to convince Red Army soldiers that surrender was inevitable. The offer Stalin refused. Yakov was transferred to Sachsenhausen, a concentration camp near Berlin designed for high-value prisoners. He was placed in the Zellenbau, the isolation wing, where the Nazis kept their most important captives under constant surveillance. German intelligence officers interrogated him repeatedly, pressuring him to denounce the Soviet Union. They offered better treatment, better food, even freedom if he would just cooperate. Yakov refused every time. Whatever else he wasn't a traitor. Back in Moscow, Stalin learned his son had been captured. His response? War is war. He immediately classified Yakov as a disgrace. Stalin had signed Order No. 270, declaring any Soviet soldier who surrendered to be a traitor. That rule applied to everyone, including his own flesh and blood. Then came February 1943. The Germans had suffered a catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, and Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the highest-ranking German officer ever captured, was in Soviet hands. The Nazis made an offer: trade Paulus for Yakov. Stalin's response has become legendary. I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant. Some historians argue he was maintaining principles, that accepting special treatment would undermine Soviet morale. Others see it differently. A father who valued military rank over his son's life. Declassified files later revealed something stunning. Stalin actually ordered 2 secret rescue attempts in 1942, suggesting his feelings were more complex than his public statements indicated. But both missions failed, and by 1943, Yakov's fate was sealed. The final day, April 14th, 1943. Yakov had been imprisoned for nearly 2 years. The isolation, the constant surveillance, the psychological torture, it had all taken its toll. According to scattered reports, something changed in him near the end. He became defiant, less compliant with his guards. What happened next remains disputed to this day. The official Nazi report claimed Yakov deliberately walked toward the electrified fence surrounding the camp and threw himself into it, dying by suicide. But witnesses told different stories. One account states Yakov got into a heated argument with a guard during his exercise period. When ordered back to his barracks, he allegedly shouted, "Shoot." The guard did. A bullet to the head. Another version suggests he was shot first. Then his body was pushed against the electric fence to stage a suicide. British officers who examined captured German documents after the war found records indicating Yakov was shot after attempting to flee from an argument with British prisoners by running into an electric fence. The British Foreign Office even considered presenting these papers to Stalin at the Potsdam Conference as a gesture of condolence, but decided against it, fearing diplomatic complications. The truth died with Yakov in that concentration camp. What we know is that SS guards killed Stalin's eldest son, and the circumstances were covered up by both Nazi and Soviet authorities. The silence after. When Stalin learned of Yakov's death, he showed no emotion, no funeral, no memorial, no acknowledgement that died in enemy captivity. The Soviet regime buried the story under layers of silence and secrecy. Yakov's wife, Yulia Meltzer, was arrested by the NKVD and imprisoned for years simply for being married to him. His daughter Galina grew up without either parent, raised by relatives who rarely spoke about her father. Unlike Stalin's other grandchildren, she was never photographed, never mentioned, never included in official family records. For decades, Yakov's story remained hidden in classified archives. Only after Stalin's death in 1953, and especially after the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, did documents begin to surface revealing the full scope of his tragic life and suspicious death. The buried truth. Today, historians still debate what really happened at Sachsenhausen on that April evening. Was it suicide by a man who'd finally broken under the weight of abandonment and torture? Was it murder disguised as suicide? Was it an execution following confrontation? The scattered evidence points in multiple directions, and the lack of reliable testimony leaves us with more questions than answers. What isn't disputed is the cruelty. A father who let his son rot in a concentration camp, who refused a prisoner exchange that could have saved him, and who then erased him from history. Yakov Dzhugashvili died twice. Once behind the barbed wire of Sachsenhausen, and again in the deliberate silence imposed by his father's regime. His loyalty meant nothing. His service meant nothing. Being Stalin's son didn't protect him. It condemned him. This is history they don't teach in schools. If this story left you speechless, you need to subscribe to Timeless Words right now. We're bringing you the most shocking, untold stories from the past. Hit that like button, share this video with anyone who thinks they know everything about World War II, and drop a comment telling us what you think really happened to Yakov. Was it suicide? Murder? Stalin's orders? We want to hear your theories. And remember, the truth is always more disturbing than the legends. We'll see you in the next one.